This video is going to be a commentary piece that's going to cover some of the questions leading into the Ravens mandatory minicamp that starts on Tuesday. Just up front, there will be no film displayed in this. Again, this is just a commentary piece with some of the questions that are in my mind in terms of certain spots on the field. But I would caution against us as Ravens fans judging the entirety of the roster based upon those two or three competitions that are key. It happens every year, obviously, for every team. We, as Ravens fans with high expectations, which is a good thing, it's a positive, we have such high expectations that when there are question marks, we focus on them sometimes too acutely and shine too bright of a light on it because this is a uniquely talented roster on both sides of the ball. But we use cornerback and outside linebacker to make that point obvious. And when I say corner, I mean outside corner. I just as easily could have used tight end or maybe wide receiver. Offensive line is the only position that I would not, it would be a stretch, I think, to make this comparison with. It's the position that has the most concern, offensive line, that is. But also, perhaps it's the one that has the most options, as weird as that sounds to put those two sentences back together. Wide receiver viewed as the spot with maybe the least amount of game ready depth compared to the other three. Again, outside linebacker, corner, and tight end. But think about this spot a year ago, where we were a year ago at this time. We had Marlon Humphrey at corner as a lock. Great. Marcus Peters was long gone. We had no clue about what Brandon Stevens was about to unleash on the NFL. Rock Ya-Sin had signed a 1-year deal with the Ravens in May, I think just after the draft. The Ravens didn't sign Ronald Darby until August 17th, one day after it was announced that Humphrey was getting foot surgery. I'm making the comparison right now, mid-June, to 1 year ago. Remember that, I guess a little less than a year ago, remember that feeling of not knowing who was going to play corner after Marlon got hurt and it was announced he was going to have foot surgery, but Harbaugh said it wouldn't keep him out too long? We didn't know who was going to play corner. We all had opinions on it. Mine were put in video form, I think August 16th, the night of. I'll try to link that up in the description. You can check it out if you want. But at that point, you had Stevens, you had Ya-Sin, and some of our young guys. We hadn't signed Darby yet, signed him a day later. Look what we'll have to show up at minicamp tomorrow. Again, I'm using this to prove how uniquely talented this roster is. Yeah, you still have Humphrey. We now understand what Stevens is capable of. And then the rookie, Nate Wiggins. The position looks stronger just by the nature of the fact that Wiggins appears to be a guy who can contribute from day one, well ahead of the progression that Stevens made as a safety and then a corner, and then who would have thought he would shine the way he did as an outside corner last year. Outside linebacker might be in a similar situation. And I'm quite sure that people will have different opinions on that. Look, Clowney didn't sign until August 18th of last year. Van Noy, not until week 4. He actually signed, I think, 3 days before the road win over the Browns. This year, we've got Van Noy under contract, 2 years, $9 million. Essentially, could be a 1-year deal if they wanted to. Owe was extended after putting up 5 sacks in 2023. Ojabo, hopefully he's finally healthy. We would love for that to be the case for an entire season. It would not surprise me at all if the Ravens signed another experienced outside linebacker during camp. They usually do that. I have no idea who that would be. I'm not pretending to know the player they should target. Tavius Robinson and Adisa Isaac appear set to compete for reps behind Van Noy, Owe, and Ojabo. The Ravens really need Ojabo to step into the at least 5+ sack range this year, hopefully 6 to 8. But point is, this is a group that appears stronger than it did a year ago. 2 months before Clowney signed, and Van Noy was an afterthought at that point. Still can't believe no one signed him last year before training camp. These are two positions of strength that I think are being underrated here. It's almost paradoxical, really. Sometimes there's this concern about a position, outside linebacker, yet excitement over a draft pick at the same spot at that same spot on the field. And yes, if you didn't know, realize it. I am talking about picking Isaac in the 3rd round. I'm not going to digress though. I do understand if other people don't share the same optimism about our outside linebacker edge group. I understand that. Health is a big factor. 1 year away from injury for Ojabo, or 1 injury away from Ojabo, Robinson, or Isaac having to play more snaps than perhaps is the plan. I do think that Malik Harrison is going to be on this team again as a hybrid outside linebacker, inside linebacker. He can be trusted at either spot. Maybe he's not going to play 50 snaps in a game, but he's capable. I'm going to use him to parlay or shift this into talking about the offensive line. I'm going to make a comparison within the Ravens team, relate Malik Harrison to a player on the Ravens offensive line. You probably already know who it is. Harrison's really good against the run as an OLB. He can play boundary side inside linebacker. We walk him back, kind of create that 4-3 look from our base personnel. Having him as a backup just makes sense in the event of injury. We can use him on early downs, given his versatility. Ojabo also won't be cleared until training camp, sometime during training camp. And he's really going to be the determining factor, if you ask me, as to whether or not the Ravens go sign an outside linebacker edge in mid to late August again. Harrison kind of reminds me of Patrick McCarry. Now, I'm not equating their ability at their respective positions, but they can each offer something at two spots, the positional versatility. That kind of gives the Ravens coaching staff some security for the offensive line. Certainly the biggest question mark on the team, and it is, for me, not the one I'm focusing on mentally, but I will talk about it here for a moment in detail. Certainly the biggest question mark with Moses, Zeitler, and John Simpson gone, leaving Ronnie Stanley and Linderbaum as the only returning starters. Now, I think McCarry's a starter. Whether he starts by design from week one or not, I think he's capable. He can compete against the guys he will face from the first snap of the game in an NFL regular season game or playoff contest. Is he as good at tackle as a prime Ronnie Stanley? Of course not. But he does offer effectiveness there. He does have some really good film at guard, although it's 3 or 4 years ago at this point, and that has not been his customary position. In fact, I thought it would have been a spot where McCarry could have started last year in 2023, but that was first offered or made available to Salah as a 6th-round pick, surprising, clearly, and then the left guard job was won by Simpson. Now, Simpson's a guy that I thought played well at times, but the 2-year, $9 million contract, I don't know about you, that was a surprise to me. I'm not going to say much more about that other than I think we can replace his level of play for less money in the form of a veteran Josh Jones or second-year rookie Andrew Voorhees, if that makes sense. Being a second-year rookie, he didn't play at all his first year. Replacing the entire right side is clearly critical. Moses being the underrated guy at right tackle. Zeitler was a phenomenal pickup for the Ravens organization in March of 2021. Recall that the Giants released him to clear cap space, like 10 or 12 million. Ravens were fortunate to get a player of that caliber in that manner. Now they're in a race against time to perhaps find or create or develop a starter at right guard and right tackle at the same time. Ben Cleveland is the name that we talk about every year. Coach Evans at Sip to Tally just did a video on him recently. I think Edgar Allen did as well. I'll check both of those out. I'll try to link them up here in the description. If you haven't checked them out already, please do so. Those guys do amazing work. Jones, McCarry, and even Falele, I guess, are options at right guard that the team might look at. I do think it's probably naive to expect or forecast Ben Cleveland to just be this year's Ben Powers, someone who comes in during their 4th year and just exceeds beyond all expectations based upon the first 3. That would probably be best case scenario as a former 3rd-round pick. I believe Cleveland, if he was to come in, start, play every snap, play at an extremely high level like Ben Powers did in 2022, and generate another comp pick for the Ravens front office to basically go through the same process again. Can he do that? Could he provide that level of play, what Powers did in 2022? I think he's capable of approaching that level of play or nearing it. Is it a likely outcome? I'm not sure. I don't think so. I can't say whether he'll even win the job at this point. So it feels disingenuous to try to forecast him giving us something along the same lines that Ben Powers did in 2022 or that Kevin Zeitler did at right guard, obviously a different position over on the right side, in 2023. I do believe, however, that the pieces are there to construct a solid offensive line. The front office has created depth or options with many of these guys, many of these positions, that is, and the individual players we have a lot of individual options to contribute and or execute. Does the level of athleticism required in Todd Monken's offense is it markedly higher such that it funnels down the options for 2024? Meaning, do we need more athletic guys? Is Cleveland not capable of playing since we're in such a spread mode at times? Can he not execute some of the zone or right guard schemes? This will lead me into a discussion about Rosengarten, Macari, and Linderbaum all playing together. Rosengarten's very quick, athletic, versatile, smart. Seeing the video coming out now of his pre-draft visit was pretty cool. In some ways, I still think he's a younger, lighter version of Moses, although I do think the Rosengarten is a little more capable of dealing with a wide variety of pass rush moves at this point in his career. His problem, potentially, could be dealing with the larger frame defensive ends that are the 6'6", 280, 290 range that he will encounter at times in our schedule. I'm not sure that is a market weakness because, yeah, he will get heavier. He probably already has. He was listed at 6'5", I think 305 or 310. I think the right tackle competition kind of determines where right guard goes in a weird way, meaning would the Ravens be better served with Rosengarten at right tackle, Macari at right guard, Macari being a smaller, quicker, athletic guy than Cleveland, package them next to Linderbaum? That's a very athletic group. You certainly can accomplish anything you want to, zone, inside zone, outside zone, whatever you want to call it. Now, how much different are those guys from Moses, Zeitler, and Linderbaum playing next to each other off that right side? Well, you've got experience is a detriment in 2024 compared to those three. Snaps played together, maybe overall play strength is a relative weakness for the trio that I just described. I don't know. I won't really finalize or sign off on that evaluation, but I am saying that compared to Zeitler and Moses, those two, Rosengarten and Macari, playing next to each other could be less physically imposing in the run game. Where do you think the O-line ends up? There'll be a ton of discussion about it. There has been already, for sure. I'm not going to say O-line isn't a concern for me. I'm not. But I am less fearful of this group not being able to form a cohesive unit than others. Check out Cole Jackson's YouTube and Twitter. He spends a considerable amount of time focusing on the offensive line. So I would check out his channels for specific observations on Cleveland, Rosengarten, Voorhees as well. I think the two veterans that are there, Macari and Jones, it's pure brilliant to have those guys as sixth or seventh men in a basketball comparison, meaning they're not starters from day one, but they could be starters in week 4 or week 8 or week 12 if someone goes down for injury. So I credit the front office for creating that dynamic. What I will say that I'm most interested in, and what we probably have, and unfortunately it's the thing that we have no way of confirming at all, is how the defense is installed. This first point that I try to make, I may not be able to explain it well enough. And that's probably my own limitations as a football analyst, I guess, at this point, or someone with coaching experience who has a microphone. I think losing Mike Macdonald, tremendous loss, don't get me wrong. People are not wrong in saying that we've got to find a way to recoup or make up for his loss. But it's the entirety of the defensive staff, the losses that were there. It's not just Mike Macdonald. He did have a lot of different coverages and stunts and blitzes to use. Many defensive coordinators do. At the NFL level, all of them do at the NFL and high level of college football. I think Macdonald used a lot of coverages from the same platform, meaning offering the quarterback the same look. He's not an outlier there either. Many people try to disguise their coverages. Did he use more coverages than the typical defensive coordinator in the NFL? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not willing to say that he did on a weekly basis. I think the key difference was in application. Here's where I might lose you. It's not your fault if I do. It's based on my own inability to explain the thoughts I have. I suspect that where Macdonald and the staff last year was truly brilliant, Anthony Weaver, Denard Wilson, all of them. First of all, huge mistake for the Eagles, if you ask me, to not, I think, promote Denard Wilson after 2022, was it, when they could have? Anyway, that group, I think, where they were most brilliant, and this is somewhat speculative, is mitigating risk. And again, I'm speculating here. If you want to call me out on that, go right ahead. The combined experience that they had, I think afforded us the ability to teach up front in a way that caused less problems later. The install, you can have a ton of blitzes, you can have a ton of stunts, multiple coverages. What Mike McDonald and those guys did was they had multiple versions of some of these coverages. Cover 3, Tampa 2, 2 deep, 4 under, what I call the glitch blitz. They had multiple versions of those coverages, and they executed them well. What I think was an added layer of brilliance was teaching the players not just when to run them, but when not to. And I don't have a way to prove this at all. I'm going to try to explain it in a generic sense. Feel free to counteract it or add on to it if you wish. There was games where the Ravens ran 6 or 8 or 10 different coverages. And I use that with air quotes because sometimes it was 2 different versions of cover 3. There were sometimes the Ravens would do that, be very multiple in the first half, and none of them was the wrong call. I recall after the Lions game thinking, it was right around the time that I think Michigan was being looked into for stealing signs. And a couple of coaching friends of mine and I, we exchanged text messages and even met up one time and ended up talking about, are the Ravens doing the same thing? Because we're never in the wrong call. Well, first of all, you can't get away with that in the NFL. Second of all, well, unless you're Patriots at a certain time period. But my point is, avoiding the wrong call is a skill in and of itself. I think the Ravens last year, however they were able to do it, they were able to implement a versatile, devastating system that players were able to either check into or check out of certain coverages, certain concepts based on the situation and the formation the offense lined up in. Offenses get the chalk last. As a defensive coach, it's my opinion that we've got to do more teaching up front to prepare our kids, our players, so that we don't get caught in a bad situation. If it's trips B gun on 3rd and 8, what coverage do we not want to be in? If I have made the mistake as the defensive coordinator of calling this particular coverage, it's your job as the players on the field to figure out a way to check out of that. Who is responsible for that? Hint, it's not always the guy with the green dot. Anyway, so many of the simulated pressures that the Ravens ran ended up with guys dropping out. There was some real genius to that. I also think they were controlling what the offense was able to do at times. And we'll continue to do those things, the simulated pressures, mug looks, whatever you want to call them. Basically, what I'm getting at is I wish I could be a silent observer for the next 3 days during the install. Well, a lot of it's probably installed already, but just to see how the system is built. And I don't mean situation, 2nd and 7. What's the call? Cover 3. How do we execute the call versus what they line up in? Yes, that is a real flow to how it's taught. I mean, situation, 2nd and 7. What's our call? Cover 3. How do we control risk based on what they line up in, and then we execute? Perhaps this is my own background coming into play, but I think that there were games where you could watch Mike McDonald's system being run, because I do think that's what it was. I don't think it was a Ravens defense. I think there was some built-in parameters such that the players were able to minimize risk based upon the formation and how the other team, where certain players lined up. Basically, avoid giving up space related to the coverage we were going to play and how the offense lines up. I don't think Mike McDonald ran a Ravens defense. I think he has his own system in that regard. It's the only answer I've been able to come up with in terms of why were we never in the wrong call. Forgive me for rephrasing that. Zach Orr was here. Chuck Smith was here. I think it's Chris Hewitt was there as well. So that system can carry over. Some of the elements can. So things we did before, the teaching progression, can be recreated. Nonetheless, it'll be a new install from the standpoint of who is doing the installing and what we're doing on each defensive play. What coverage are we playing? What front are we in? All of those things are part of the install, but the point that I'm trying to make, the thing that most interests me is the depth to which Zach Orr and these guys will instruct or teach. I think they can reach the same level as McDonald, and those guys did last year. Maybe it will take longer, meaning Will they have enough of these things installed in week one such that Zach Orr can call anything he wants in the coverage flowchart and trust that the guys will check in or out of it? Maybe not. Of course, you get less practice time every year in the NFL because of the agreement between the league and the quote NFLPA. Injuries are a factor, also travel during the season. So you've got to get as many of these things installed during these minicamp situations, during training camp, clearly, so that in a random second down in week 5, in the middle of the third quarter, Zach Orr can call something that he hasn't touched on in a month or two. I'm really not worried about the defense, but it's the focus that I wish I could sit in on and just listen and shut up because I obviously wouldn't belong in the conversation. I'm really not worried about the defense. Like I said, I'm sure the coaches, starting with Orr, are over prepared. I don't get any sense that we have a situation like 2020 or 2021 where there's a lot of bravado from certain guys that are coaching defense, and then these simplistic coverages that can be exploited by formation and motion. I think Orr's got an incredible group of players at his disposal, and then an absolute stud in Kyle Hamilton to move around wherever he wants to and threaten the offense the most. But it's the side of the ball I've got the most interest in right now. Not necessarily when we get to training camp. That'll be the offense. This mini camp, the one that we are going to hear a whole lot about in the next 3 or 4 days, this is an opportunity for Orr and the defensive staff to get ahead. Coach Harbaugh apparently said they would ramp things up over the course of OTAs. I'm not even really referencing the physicality of player-on-player drills because you can get a lot done when you're in shells, when you're in just helmets. You can get a lot done without helmets on. Flow of communication. Let's break the flow of communication. Let's take Roquan out and let's force someone else to do it. Or let's provide some administrative overlap and have Roquan and some other player on the defense responsible for the communication flow. Risk management, I kind of talked about that earlier. Forgive me if I didn't explain it great, but basically, how do you check out of and avoid bad calls? Well, you have to practice being in a bad call. You have to tell players 2 of the next 10 play calls, or coverage, during this practice segment are going to be the wrong call. It's going to be your job to check out of it based upon the formation. And then we'll talk about it at the end of the play. Was that the right call by me or was it a bad call? You have to give the players the ability to check in and out of those things. And of course, at the NFL level, it's way more complicated than I'm even describing. Motion checks. Are we playing man and then checking the zone on motion? Is it zone to zone? There's a play that I posted up on my Patreon a couple of days ago. The Broncos check from man to quarter half on motion. And one player, one inside linebacker, not on the same page, allowed Jamison Williams to catch the ball for a 16-yard gain. Basically, this time period is what interests me the most every year, no matter the level of football, giving players tests, visual, verbal, and then evaluating it once the minicamp is over or once each rep is over. If you can't tell, I'm really fired up about what a guy like Orr, with his story, motivation level, really, no, not motivation level, his drive, is able to get done over the 3 days that they are given here. And then the crazy thing is, we've also got a guy who I haven't talked about yet in Derrick Henry, who is a Hall of Fame player to implement and use now. I haven't even mentioned that. I think it's kind of proof as to how deep the roster is, how much talent there is on this team right now in June. We're talking about 6, 7, or 8 weeks before training camp, I guess. It's kind of unbelievable that the Ravens added someone like Henry to line up next to Lamar. It's going to be a fun week to see the videos, pictures, and reports coming out of minicamp on both sides of the ball. But for me, I'm focused on the defensive install and the progression. And unfortunately, we really may not hear much about that at all because there'll be so much focus on what players shined and what players, quote, struggled during this time period. Forgive me for not showing film during this video, but really not much to show that I think would illustrate the points I was trying to make. Let me know what you think of any of my thoughts as it relates to the 3-day minicamp that the Ravens are getting ready to undergo. Certainly excited about the offensive side. I think as we get into training camp, closer to the first preseason game, that'll definitely be the focus for myself and many of us, is what we're running on offense, how we're doing so, and what manner in which what the speed is such that the offensive line is finally being constructed. Appreciate you guys' time, man. If you think other Ravens fans would enjoy this content, this commentary piece about the Ravens getting ready to start mandatory minicamp on Tuesday, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, share it out on social media to help this content get more reach.